This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by You Don't Have to Die in the End, a novel by Anita Daher, available at McNally Robinson and bookstores everywhere.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. We have a full house in separate houses today. We have our long-suffering co-host, Justin Curry, who is currently doing the dishes while we record this podcast. Dan Vadeboncoeur, our fearless producer, who is in some undisclosed mountain location. And Anita Daher, author extraordinaire, who is also on the show today to talk about how books get made. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Thanks for putting this together. I'm looking forward to this.
So, first off, the interest for our dear listener, of full disclosure, Anita and I both have books out this month from Great Plains Publications. We should both be having our book launches this month canceled. And so instead, we've been doing all kinds of different things to get the word out. You were just on the radio on CBC yesterday. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, that was incredibly fun talking with Ismaila Alpha. I guess CBC just recognized that authors were having difficulty. Ismaila is an artist himself, a musician, as we all know here in Winnipeg. And I guess they just came to realize that launches were being canceled. And they thought, well, hey, maybe we could do a little more and help authors out on the show. So I think that's fantastic. I love it. It was fun to be able to talk about my novel after so many years of writing. And I can't wait for yours. You're on tomorrow. Is that right?
That's right.
I don't know when you're playing this, but...
Yeah, this episode will drop after my radio appearance, my big radio show. Okay. Now your book.
So your radio appearance was the other yesterday. Then
the other yesterday, as far as our listeners are concerned. So your book is called "You Don't Have to Die at the End."
In the end.
In the end. I don't have my copy because I can't go to the bookstore to get it. However, what about that title in these trying times?
Oh, man. Bill Redekop on Twitter said, that has got to be the best title for this period of time. And he said he was going to go out and get the book just because of the title. I'm not going to capitalize on that. I'm not going to say, hey, guess what? Because I just think that's awful. But that aside, this is a hopeful title. You don't have to die in the end. And if you can see it, and if you can see the cover, it's got the word die in it and end in it, but there's northern lights and stars. And I look at this and I get the feeling that it's hopeful, and it is hopeful.
The cover definitely suggests it's a person on a journey. I think, in my book, Automatic Age is obviously after a robot apocalypse, but my friend Salima Nawaz has us both beat. Her new book, which was written long before this happened, launches, I think, this week, and it's called Songs for the End of the World.
Oh, man. Yeah. Okay. I want to read that one, too, and I want to read yours. Got to get these books.
So is this life imitating art, or art imitating life, or are we prophets? What's happening?
I think it's rather interesting, isn't it? Like, there's always something, people talk about something in the zeitgeist. This was, in a way, what's happening now is completely unpredicted, but it's not. We've known for so many years that something like this can happen, right? I think it was early in 2000, maybe 2004, 2005. I guess that's not early in 2000. I can't remember when, but the federal government actually traveled across the country and they were talking about pandemic preparation. Right. So we know that there's been conversations about this in a long time. And so I think for a lot of us, artists are always kind of walking on the edge of things, one foot or certainly thinking about what can be on the other side of something. And whatever that edge is, it's different for all of us. So I don't know.
So I have a question for you right down into the deep dark of making books. All right. Where our podcast, usually we like to talk about how the tinkering is done. And you have a number of novels under your belt. And so I have a question for you that's specific to how books get made when you make them. when you have here's a great example. My uncle was a mechanic, and he used to say, your car needs regular maintenance or eventually something will go wrong and it has to get fixed, right? And I've started to see my manuscripts the same way. I know there are things that I regularly maintain when I'm working on a manuscript. Dialogue is something I regularly do maintenance on while it's running, while the book is going through my head, right? But elements of plot I sometimes don't attend to properly, and then they're broken and I have to do a big fix by the end of the book. What is something that when you're writing, you're maintaining, and what is something when you're writing that I'm definitely going to have to fix that later?
Okay, first of all, I have a question for clarification. I love that analogy. But when you talk about maintenance and maintenance of dialogue, are you talking about getting it right as you get it down, or are you talking about going out, riding the bus, walking down the street, these days avoiding crowded places, and listening?
Both of those, all of that I would consider part of my maintenance. When I love writing first drafts in busy places, restaurant, and it's killing me right now to be working on a first draft of a new book. I can't go where the white noise is. I can't go where the people are. I can't steal the little snippets of conversation or the lilt in their voice and describe it. I can't do any of that. And that's usually what I think of as the maintenance. But then also when I reread, when I skim the manuscript to get back into it, I usually skip everything but the dialogue. I read all the dialogue through and just remind myself what's on everyone's mind and then keep going, as opposed to other authors I know who will say I just have to really look at my plot and make sure that that's solid before I do anything else. Which are you?
Well, it depends whether I'm writing a plot-driven novel or a character-driven novel, because I have written both, right? But that is all thought out ahead of time. If I'm writing a plot-driven novel, I plot it all out ahead of time and then good to go. But it might veer away from that, depending on where the story takes me. But I also know that my biggest failing. That's arguable. I've got many failings. But something that I'm very conscious of is that I don't want to lose interest. I need to maintain that energy, that drive to keep going forward. I don't want to get distracted, because I am easily distracted. I like getting involved in lots of different creative projects. And so I want to make sure that I just keep going forward. And that might mean that I'm realizing that this is a little thin here. This needs a little bit more explanation. Or maybe I didn't research this aspect enough. Maybe I need to find out more. But rather than distracting myself from the story and doing more research, depending on what it is, I will just sort of leave a blank space and keep going forward. It's just really important for me to get the heart. I need to get that heart of the story down. And in this particular book, I got that heart of the story down years ago, because I started writing it in 2009, but it wasn't translating well. The heart of the story that I understood, I hadn't made it clear on the page. I wasn't communicating it well enough. So it took a lot of rewrites, actually, to make sure that the story that I read, that was in my head and in my heart, was actually coming through. So dialogue, plot, I want to make sure that the plot is good, because that's where you can really get sidetracked. If something's not working and if you go forward anyway, then you have to accept that when you finish the book, you might have to go back and take out whole big chunks because something's just not working. But again, it depends whether you're writing a plot-driven or a character-driven story. And so a character-driven story, you're following the journey of the character. And so as long as you're not trying to force that character into a plot that you imagined ahead of time, which I've done, then it should work out, because it's the story of a heart. It's growth, it's journey, right?
For years, I've been getting paid to scare people. But I'm the one who's been scared all my life.
Now, our dear listeners will not have seen the way you eye rolled and the little smidgen of derision that came on when you said, "I've done both," right? So this leads me to believe that you're more of a pantser than a plotter.
I think I'm still on a journey as far as that goes. I think I'm becoming more of a pantser. Most of my novels are middle grade novels. Like I've got two older teen novels now and one junior high novel, but the rest are middle grade. And middle grade novels are plot-driven stories, primarily adventure, whatever. And so I'm quite comfortable plotting. I think the derision or the eye roll was probably just laughing at myself, because I don't know, because I have done both, but and I've fallen into traps with both. I think a long time ago, I just really came to understand that a writer can put themselves in a trap. First of all, if you decide I am a plotter or I am a pantser, and you try to stay with that no matter what story you're writing, that's where you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah,
and
totally
sometimes
agree.
when for a while there, I felt like I was a little bit of a plot doctor or book doctor or whatever. Not really, but in a way, because in realizing this, I was able to give advice to other writers when I was teaching workshops and whatnot. They'd come to me and say, this is, I'm stuck with this. Well, tell me what kind of a story it is. It's this story. Okay. And what are you doing? Well, I'm doing this. So it might be somebody who's trying to write a character-driven novel, but has written a plot and they're trying to force that character into a plot, just like I mentioned. Or, if they are writing a mystery or a thriller, an adventure story, and have not figured out the plot, and they're just going. I mean, they might go for 300 pages before we get to, something that needs to move the story forward. So that's where you can get into trouble. My middle grade stories are plot driven, and I've just come to understand that. And I love writing those. They're fun. There's usually a lot of humor. But
I'd be curious to know how that started for you. How did that start? How did middle grade novels? Did you know? The reason I ask it is because Justin and I did a book called Dragon Nanny, or we're working on a book called Dragon Nanny, which rolls out of Cassian Tonk and Rust and Water, 2 books that we didn't realize were for young readers until they were in the world. And parents reading them to young readers is what sort of got that entire train moving for us. We just made the book we most wanted to make. And then when the readers showed up, we were like, oh, okay, it's a super all ages book. Let's just keep doing what we're doing, but we'll market it towards young people then. Is it like that with you? Did you know you were doing books for the middle grade, or were you writing stories and then a publisher said, hey, this is where that would fit? What was the trajectory there?
I knew I was writing for middle grade. And I love that you say that, because every writer has a different process and different way of doing it. Tim Wynne-Jones also told me the same thing. Actually, he said that he writes a story and then afterwards, we sort of figure out where it fits, or maybe it's during the process. But I also think that most of us have an age that we go to in our minds when we go to our creative place, a place that's most comfortable, an age that's most comfortable. And so when I was imagining a story, when I go back to my first book, which was about a girl who was terrified of flying, and she gets caught in a forest fire, and she has to fly her mother's float plane off of this little lake to sort of hop it to another place in order to save herself and her neighbor and her dog. I went immediately to 12 years old, because I remember so vividly being 12 years old, in and around there, 11, 12, 13, when I was in Churchill and running around the big rocks on the bay and, finding these old sheds, and we'd go into them not understanding rules about private property at the time, and find boxes of old books. And then in Baker Lake, just having these adventures out on the tundra with my friend. That's the age that I was. Oh my goodness. I just have so many fun anecdotes that I can easily go to. So for me, when I went to a creative place, a story place, a time of adventure and fun, it was 12 years old. And so that was easy. And it wasn't until I, started writing more and more books that I started really thinking about, not thinking about my growth as a writer. When I started growing as a writer and thinking about things more deeply, thinking about issues, thinking about how as human beings we process things at different ages, and thinking about more difficult subjects, that lent more naturally to older readers. And so that's why I got into writing for teens. But I got to tell you, my teen novels, they can be tough subjects. And the reason the last one I wrote was in 2007, and I had had readers. I would tour around, and I had these teenagers ask me, so when are you going to write another one like this? It was such an emotionally exhausting journey for me, because it's tough. Because I don't know about how you do this in your art, but when I'm writing, when I'm really, I mean, you live for so long with a character, right? But you're really in the skin of that character. So the tough stuff that they're going through, it can really rip you apart. And that's why it takes me sometimes so many rewrites to actually go deep enough. So that's something I find too. I might kind of skim the surface of where I know because I'm kind of afraid to go somewhere. So it's a little hard for me to go deeper. And when I do, that's when I know when I've got it right. That's when I got the goosebumps. That's when I'm bawling my eyes out and I can't actually see what I'm writing, which means I have to do another rewrite. But it's tough.
So you write for yourself first, it sounds like, no matter what.
I do write for myself.
You keep in mind what the publisher is wanting. Yeah, that's awesome.
And again, I respect every writer's process, but for me, it's about finding a truthful story, and that's being truthful to the character and the decisions that they make, and so that's I'm just trying to find my way through, finding that story, the first draft. Later drafts, I start thinking about the reader. And I actually mentioned this in a podcast interview a couple of weeks ago. It's a tremendous series that's with the I Read Canadian folks. Actually, they're supporting it, and Access for Copyrights supporting it. But did I mention that I get distracted easily and I lose my train of thought? Story first.
Yeah,
yes. Story first. And then I think about the reader, because when I wrote my last tough novel, it was called Spider Song. It was with Penguin, and it's out of print now. But it was about a girl. She was a cutter, so she self-injured, and I wrote the novel. I found the story, and then afterwards, in doing a little additional research, I learned that writing about that physical act of cutting was actually a trigger for some readers, and I didn't want that in my story. So I thought, okay, so what can I do? What can I do and still tell the truthful story? So I think there was a little bit at the beginning, but then instead I just built in strategies. So I had her all the way through just using her strategies to not try to do that. And so that's how I treated that. So that was my way of being respectful to my reader. And again, every writer has a different process. Every writer has different thoughts on this, and I respect them all. But this is the way I felt good about my story. So I think about readers later on. And in this story, okay, so this is a little different in this one. Okay, so it's a teen novel, and it's about a young offender. And so she's rough and tough and from a tough town. And I had no swears, just because that's not something that's not the way I write. That's not something on the air. It's not my daily language unless I'm vacuum cleaning, but that's a secret. Only you know that now, right?
we'll bleep that out, yeah.
Georgie, don't stay out too long or Mom will have a bird. Hello.
This may be the most hard-hitting media-related question that you've ever had, Anita. From Twitter, I know that you as an author are a tea maker. You make a nice pot of tea before you start writing. Is this true or false? Am I mischaracterizing you?
No, it is true. It is part of the story.
Right? Whenever you're on Twitter and you're like, okay, I'm going to get writing, there's always something to do with a hot cup of tea. Now, I also am a tea maker when I write. I love to have a pot of tea with me when I'm writing. But it occurred to me that there are sort of two ways in which I use my tea as a writer. Sometimes as a fortification and other times as a reward. Which are you?
Nice.
Are you a person that takes the sip and then writes the sentence, or the person that leans back from the keyboard and says, that's the one, and then takes the sip as a reward?
No, I think it's the former. It's I drink the tea all the way through. I don't deny myself anything. Maybe I should give myself rewards. That would be really nice. But I tend to reward myself often and all the way through. What kind of tea do you drink? That's another hard-hitting question.
Later. It depends on when in the day it is for me. I really like a nice, thick, dark chai for the evening writing sessions, and I usually double or triple the bags. I know people are probably gasping in horror at that, but I just love it to give me a kick right in the face. Yeah. In the morning, a nice Earl Grey, a good, nice little bit of Earl Grey. It's always always the way to go. Which brings us
Yeah,
to
we're the same as far as
which brings us to the idea of a schedule. Do you keep a writing schedule? Do you follow the muse?
I tend to keep a schedule. Yeah, I mean, when I've got a deadline, when I'm in a story, when I'm working, and I know, okay, this is the time that I am now committed to this story, and I'm going to get it done. I've got to get it done by a certain period of time. I am in the chair every morning. That's when I tend to shut down Facebook, not Twitter so much because I have other responsibilities with the Writers Union, but I will. What's the word that not decommission? I cut it off. I say, Facebook, I quit you. And they say, no, you don't really mean it. You can just go away for a little while and then you can come back. So that's what I do. Just because I know I'm weak, just like I can't wait to give myself rewards. I'm weak. I'll forget and I'll just go, well, I'm just going to check, and then my thought is fragmented and I already have problems with that. So I shut down social media. I am a morning person. I wake up really early. My usual time to wake up, my comfortable time to wake up is 5:30, and right away I get in the chair and I might check email or news something first, but I'll have my cup of tea. I'll say, good morning, Twitterverse. Let's have a cup of tea. and then I get to it. And I will write every day. And that can be physically hard on the body to stay long periods of time in the chair. So I do actually have now a treadmill in my office, which I will go on, but I'm much more likely to get up after a few hours and go for a bike ride or go for a run when I'm running, just to keep the body, moving well, because in past times I find that I lock up really easily. But I'm usually good for about 5 hours, then I have to go off and do something else. But I stay pretty committed to a story once I'm in it. And I am a morning person, and so I have my Earl Grey in the morning and my chai in the afternoon. In the evening I have to have something decaffeinated. How about you? Are you more of an afternoon evening person, or do you have a routine?
Yeah, I'm a pretty slavish to a schedule. I like to do writing, first draft writing, first thing in the morning. If I have my druthers, I get up and I just go right away and write what's fresh in my head, fresh from the unconscious, just everything, just blah, I'll get the mess out.
The brain
early.
Being on the page.
That's right. And usually what that does is, and sometimes that's 10 minutes and sometimes that's an hour and a half. It depends on the flow. I don't restrict or worry about how much I'm going to get in that first flow. And usually during that time, I also am then thinking about some illustration, some composition. The other part of my brain that's like, okay, we're going to also have to get drawing today. We're also going to have to get putting books together today, starts to wake up. And so the writing is sort of a separate stretch exercise for the brain, and I don't worry about it. I get a lot of writing done in those early mornings, but not much of it is any good, generally speaking, but it's become a really good piece of exercise for me.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm opposite. My best writing is in the morning, and then afterwards I will edit and tweak and things like that.
Right. And then if I get on a perfect day, then I'll also do 2 or 3 hours of illustration in around there, and then usually while I'm illustrating things, better ideas, better turns of phrase, better ways to construct the mess that came out early will occur to me. And I often don't do a rewrite then. I don't go back and look at what I wrote before. I'll just start with that new idea, that new framework when I sit down to write in the afternoon. My best writing is usually late at night or in the evenings, but I can't get to it if I haven't done that morning stretch.
Oh, that's interesting. That's your warm-up time.
Yeah, it kind of just sort of gets the momentum. It's like you were talking about momentum, and I deeply connected with this idea that you need the momentum. But for me, my momentum is not connected to the moment, but to the seed of the idea, which comes early. And then it kind of has to roll around with everything else that's on my mind during the day before it comes out.
It seems to me that that seed of an idea is very important, because are you talking about the theme or the idea, the heart of the story that carries it through, the through line?
Yeah, so a lot of things. So like specifically, what usually, Justin and I have talked about this a lot. We get something that our common language for it is we call it an anchor image. And an image comes together to me that is not necessarily connected to a specific place in the plot or the narrative or even the conversation. Just a moment, not a movement between the characters. And that's where things will start to sort of expand from. So like right now, I'm working on the follow-up to Automatic Age, which is called The Backbone of Night. And there's a scene, I don't know where it fits. I don't know where it's going to go, but there's a scene I'm working on that's slowly getting longer on both ends until it'll connect to something, where the father and the son are walking through this set of hills, and there's this weird man who's watching them, who's covered in birds. And every time he moves, the birds fly away. And whenever he stops, they land on him again. And it's very unnerving for the father, and I don't know why that guy, I don't know who that guy is. I don't know where he's from. I don't know what those hills are. I don't know how they got there, and I don't know where they're going. But that idea, I can't shake it. It started in that early thing, and so I'm just writing around it until there's enough of it to plug into another thing, which is very different than how I would do a graphic novel. In a graphic novel, you would have to draw that image. And so you would have a transition image that got you there. And so you'd have to know what came before and after. Whereas in narrative, I have, or at least in the way that I structured how the story is written for Automatic Age, there are gaps of time where the characters have moved to different places and the reader doesn't get to be told how they got there necessarily, just to know that they are constantly on the move. So I have this sort of MacGuffin in that if I can't figure out how to make it fit, I don't worry about the geography of how they got there. I make the scene fit the dialogue. So what they're talking about might be the bridge. So the reason the reader is there is because this is the place where the conversation continued, right? Or the theme is there. So this is the place where that idea, whatever the sort of, I don't know what you call it, the spirit of the story is arriving, right? And whatever symbols or imagery that I want to use has been recalled again in that area. So I try to leave that as the guide for the reader so that there's not just a bunch of non sequitur stuff, but I let the ideas arrive out of order often, and then I have to sort of figure out how they fit.
I've had other writers, not many, but I've heard a few writers mention that a scene will come to them, and you're a very visual person because of the type of work that you do. So, talking to other writers who are talking about narrative all the time, they'll do it in that way with narrative. They'll have an idea for a scene and they'll write that scene, no idea how it's going to fit into the story, and then they figure it out afterwards. But I love this, this idea of starting with an image. And, how that would work for me is maybe not an image, but an idea, a thought, a phrase, or something like that. And then I'll be imagining, where that takes place and who the characters are. But then you have to build a whole world around it.
Taggart steps onto the moors as the fog curls around his ankles. He shivers, buttons his coat, and walks on, disappearing into the mist. A shadowy figure lurches into frame, dripping with foul water and dark, oozing mud. Yeah.
Bill, for the last time.
In a minute!
It's a bit of a puzzle. I mean, not the puzzle of putting it all together for you, but the puzzle of, here's this image that I'm struck by. It's holding me. What's the story here?
Well,
would you say that's fair?
Definitely fair, yeah. And the other thing, too, is that, collaborating with Justin as often as we do, there's this neat part of me that now that I'm working on prose novels as well as the graphic novels, I have really realized that part of what happens when we're collaborating on comics or graphic novels together is the subconscious elements that I usually have to figure out what those themes and emotional beats are and all that stuff that you'd have to bake into your prose. I can just freely let Justin do all of that. And then I arrive to the pictures, and whatever I feel looking at them becomes that beat.
Oh, nice. Right?
And he's been working on last night. How late did you stay up working on that stuff, Justin, for Dragon Nanny?
It was around 1:30 or 2. I sent you that email.
That was an early night for you then, right?
Yeah. I've actually, as you guys have been having this discussion, I'm sorry I've been so quiet, but I'm quite aware that my connection, I don't think, is quite as good as either of yours. So I'm afraid I'm going to come off as a little too garbled to be too big of a part of the podcast on this episode. But I'm doing exactly what you guys were just talking about, where the world that the next graphic novel is set in, I didn't exactly know what the character of the world was still a bit of a mystery. And so I've spent the last couple of days just building background environments, and the beginning of the story is the main character just kind of exploring the world. And so along with him, I've just been kind of building all these desert environments and beaches and grass hills with all these floating islands, and kind of just been discovering the world. And now I've done all this work, I have all these scenes, and now I'm starting to plop it into the actual InDesign document. And I didn't exactly, I was just kind of going to town on environments, and now this little narrative is setting itself up, which I couldn't see the big picture until just recently. And now I realize the story that's been there the whole time. I'm starting to see it, and it's really neat.
Yeah, Anita, for your sake and to first-time listeners, Justin and I have been working on Dragon Nanny back and forth for, I guess, a year or two now. And
yeah, and it kind of goes back to what Anita was saying at the beginning of the episode as well. Like, it was the initial idea, we had a chunk of it, but we almost needed to get away from it for a while and come back to figure out the rest of it, And we've
gone through, I would say, we keep throwing out the plot. That's the thing about this story that we keep doing. We keep saying, okay, it's about, this is what's going to happen. No. This is what's going to happen. No. Because we know what it's about emotionally, right? This connection of parent to child, and the way that the parent will sacrifice anything for the child, and how they have to allow the child to grow up. And this is the Dragon Nanny, right? We're doing it through this lens of this fantasy world with this little robot nanny caring for dragon eggs. But those beats are all in there. What it's really about when you look at it is so obvious. So it's just been a question of what are the ways in which we're going to show it that will be interesting to our readers. And now that we have a better sense of who our readers are after the last two books, we kind of been pivoting and moving around to kind of take that reader on a journey that they haven't been on the other two books, which is another thing. Like, we're not doing the same thing again. We're trying to say, okay, you went here and you did this, and you went here in Rust and Water and you did this, and here's a different kind of story. Same kind of ingredients. There's a silent guardian, and there's someone that needs them, and there's a wild alien environment, but how they navigate it, we've just been kind of exploring along the way, which is really wild, actually.
I love that. And I love what you said about throwing out the plot. And so what you're working on is a character-driven story. So you can do that. I think the plot can change. You can get trapped in a plot. And that actually it made me think of my experience. The reason this book took me 10 years to write is I had the heart of the story, just like you're talking about the emotional beats, the heart, you know what it's about. But when I started writing it, I was so used to writing plot-driven stories. I think I panicked partway through, and I threw in, a bit of a crime novel. And, I had all kinds of things going on that I was forcing my characters into a situation. And it was all very exciting with, plane crashes and other things that are happening. Well, there's still a sort of plane crash in this one, but it's different. And it wasn't working, because I panicked, and instead of just following the character's journey, I stuck to what was most familiar to me. And so that's part of the reason. This book, right now it's called You Don't Have to Die in the End. I have to tell you, in the beginning, it was called Elliot Grimm. I just had a name, Elliot Grimm. The book wasn't working, and so this is just something that I just wanted to mention. I thought when I started rewriting it, like I had set it aside and I wanted to get back into it, and I thought, okay, it's still not working. I need to do something really different so I can come at it from a completely different perspective, so I can see it with fresh eyes, maybe something like that. The tricks that we play with ourselves, right? And so I thought, I'm going to change the sex of my main character and still have that character interact, because it was still a story about a fragmented family. It was still a story about a tragic past and how this character was going to work the way through it. But I changed the sex of my character, and I really loved it. And so that's why Elliot Grimm became Eugenia Grimm. And the book changed quite a bit after that, I have to say, because, young men and women will interact differently with each other. But the other characters they stayed somewhat the same.
Can I ask you a question that I think, I know from comments and feedback that we get about the podcast that a good number of our listeners are people who are starting, emerging, getting that first novel, getting that first comic or graphic novel sort of out of them. You just described what I think a lot of early writers would be the moment they give up. Like, the book doesn't work, the main character isn't the way you like it, and you can't get the plot to fit the heart of the story. But you didn't say, I'm not a writer, I don't know how to do this. What was the thing that allowed you to say, these are the changes that I'm going to make in order to stay with this?
I never give up on a story, even one that I had to physically say, okay, this story is not working, I have to walk away from it. It's still out there somewhere. And so I know that one day I might go back to it. I might have a new idea. Who knows where these ideas come from and a different way to approach it. I never give up on a story. I am prepared to completely tear it apart. I'm not too, there's the word precious about, we can't be precious with our work. It's a terrible word. I don't like that word, so I don't know why I used it. But I mean, we get too attached. I'm attached to the heart of my story, but how that character goes through that journey, I am completely open to and excited to see how that's going to happen. And you have to be open to changes. And sometimes if you're too close to it, you just can't. Like you talked about, working on your next story and how it's taken time and you've gone away and gone back to it. That's the healthiest way to approach it. So for writers who might give up, don't give up. Just set it aside. Maybe you're too locked into the idea of what it should be. So go away, paint a shed, whatever.
What, are you building a dam or something?
Yeah.
You ever built one before?
No.
How do you know it'll work?
Well, of course it will. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah, but how do you know?
I just know.
Well, you do lots of other things. You act and you produce a show and you do all kinds of stuff. Do you want to tell people what else you do with your life? What have you done with your life, Anita?
What have I done with my life? Why am I a writer? Good life choices. No, I'm kidding. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I have tried on occasion to walk away from writing. I mean, I started out with a career in the aviation industry, in air traffic services. And my husband and I both worked in air traffic services, and he's an air traffic controller. I was a flight service specialist, otherwise known as a radio operator. And when our girls were very young, we were shift workers, so having 5 different sets of caregivers was really hard on them. So I made the decision to, first of all, take a leave of absence, and then with our continued moving around, it just made sense for me to cut that tie and resign. But it's just like, okay, what else am I? Yeah, I'm a mom and a wife, and that's really important. But I thought, what else? And I had always wanted to be a writer. When I was younger, I told myself I could never be good enough. But by the time I was in my late 20s, I'd forgotten that. I used to tell myself that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So
there wasn't a moment that allowed you to say, okay, now I'm going to write? You had just forgotten that you had the misgivings? Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Honestly, that's pretty much it, because I talked myself out of so much when I was young. I do remember coming to a point in my adult life when I watched my now husband, at the time we weren't married, do go-kart racing with his pals who were all...
He was just a handsome stranger then.
He was not quite a stranger. We were going out, but we weren't married. And he went and did these go-kart races with his friends. I was supposed to join them, but I was just overcome with this shyness. And I just thought, oh, I can't do this because I'm not going to do it right. And it'll be ridiculous. And I'm going to blush. And I really hate blushing, and blushing makes me blush more. So I didn't do it. And at that moment, as I watched them go around, I thought, why do I do this to myself? I just missed out on something that I really want to do because I'm shy. And so it wasn't an overnight switch, but at that point, I think I told myself I can't just keep missing out on things because I'm shy, or I don't think I'm good enough, or I think I'm going to be embarrassed. And so I think that was part of the seed of that. And then it was just years later, it's just like, yeah, I'm going to write. And so that seed was already planted that, yes, you can do anything. You can do anything you want, if you work really hard at it and you're just willing to put in the time and the hours and not expect it to happen overnight. That I firmly believe. We get into the subject of talent. Okay, I believe that some people do have raw talent. I don't. And raw talent, I don't think will be publishable work or work that an audience is ready to receive unless you keep working at it and develop those skills. Skills have to be developed. You have to put in the time, put in the hours, whether you've got that raw talent or not. And so when I realized that, I realized that I am the most pig-headed person that I know, except for other members of my family. We're all really pig-headed, and that serves well in this sort of thing. So I thought, yes, I'm going to be a writer, and I know it's going to be a long time, and I don't care, because it truly is about the journey. It's about making stories. It's about finding your way through these stories, and it's the most rewarding thing that I know. Yeah, through that journey, I've become interested in so many other things that have been associated. So I started out as a full-time writer, and then, other transferable skills. I worked in radio. I worked as a literacy tutor. I worked at a magazine as a marketing person. I worked for a publishing house. And now I'm working for an arts organization. I'm an arts administrator, and now I'm involved on boards of arts organizations and writers organizations, and one thing leads to another, and life is so interesting and so exciting. Acting terrified me, but here we are, and that's another journey I'm on now.
And you have a show. I ran into the last time I saw you in person. I accidentally turned the corner at McNally Robinson, our local favorite bookseller here in Winnipeg, and there was Ariel Gordon up on a pedestal, surrounded by flowers, which are mine. That's right. Reading poetry in front of the cameras, and you had what I have come to realize is producer face, right? Where the person is holding. Usually, their arms are crossed. And then they're holding the sheet that is like the stuff that you have to do, or the prompts or whatever it is, but they don't have to look at it anymore. But it's up in their field of vision. And then you had that frown of like, we're going to make this just right. And I was like, oh, well, something real is happening here. And I should have, of course, walked away and made no interruption. But instead, I just walked over and gave Ariel a hug and then walked off. So I don't actually know what was going on at that time. You want to tell us and our readers?
Oh, I'd love to. Okay, so first I have to backtrack the story a little bit. I decided that we needed an author interview show in Manitoba to raise the profile of Manitoba authors. So I had this idea on the Shaw Spotlight channel to produce and host this show, a half-hour interview show that featured not only Manitoba authors, but at least in the first season, books that are set in Manitoba, to really let just general viewers know, not necessarily people who follow literary circles, but just let people know that, man, we've got so much talent, so many interesting people that are writing stories here in Manitoba, set in our backyard, many more than most people realize. So I wanted to just raise that profile. So we started with this half-hour interview series, but because our mandate was really set to Manitoba authors with books set in Manitoba, that excluded a lot of other Manitoba authors. And I thought, well, Shaw stories, sometimes they need these little fillers, right? Just a short couple of minutes. So a way to get more authors involved was to have these Made in Manitoba minis. So the show is called Made in Manitoba, Stories from Home. And then we have these Made in Manitoba minis. And so we decided to film authors. First of all, just short little 1-minute readings, just a little bit from a current book, and then also a short Q&A segment where they just answer maybe 4 questions that will fit in between 2 and 3 minutes, and we can do lots of those. But because I had my team, it's all volunteer teams. My editor, a wonderfully talented young woman named Anita Daher. You might notice the similarity with the last name. Okay, so I'm going to sideline a little bit here, because when I was putting my team together, I didn't want to draw directly from the film industry, because when a movie comes to town, everybody in the film industry, they got to go to work. They get
pulled out, so, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was hoping to find people with transferable skills. And I was talking one day, and I was saying to my daughter was there, and I was saying, I just don't know who I'm going to get for an editor, because that's really time consuming, and I just don't know who could do that. And she said, Mom, I know how to do this. I do this all the time. And she started asking me which program I was going to use and all of these details. I just like, how do you know this? She's, what do you think I did in my room all those years when I was in high school? I don't think I actually knew. Well, she played the piano. But Yeah, she's been editing videos since she was a teenager. So because she was really involved with editing the main show, I thought I didn't want to burden her further. And she has a full-time job. So I didn't want to burden her not burden her. I didn't want to ask her to then take on these short minis. So I decided I would learn those skills. I had the program and I went through tutorials and I asked, a lot of advice from our producer at Shaw, Jonathan. And then I also asked a friend of mine who's in the film industry, George Arello, who's so helpful. He's a superb editor and he works on many movies here in town, but he's the type of fellow who's always willing to help out, right? So I asked him if he would give me a few pointers, and he says, "Yeah, sure, I'll come over right now." He's a bit of a taskmaster because he does expect perfection, but I'm so glad for that, really. And so he helped me learn how to edit these. So now I have more skills. Now I'm an editor too. So so I'm a writer, I'm a producer, I'm a party clown. No, that was years ago.
Whoa! Back that up. You don't get to gloss over party clown. Tell us that story.
That was 100 years ago. It's just, again, it's one of those things. It's that restless mind. It's wanting to try new things. And I was in Thompson and I was with my girls. This is before I started writing. It's actually when I started acting a little bit in theater, just local theater. I had a home business that I had started up. It had to do with coffee and tea. And I don't know, I just started dressing up and being a party clown and doing songs and it was just friends. It wasn't an advertised thing. But yeah, I think there's actually a photo that I can find from my girls and I'm dressed up in my party clown sort of outfit. So I'll have to dig that up.
I'll leave her nameless, but you're not the first author I know that has a party clown story in their past. I'm going to have to start asking questions about party clowns, and I wonder if maybe there's a through line, right, that leads, like they say that, that a lot of sociopaths are surgeons. Maybe a lot of authors secretly started as clowns. So it's hard to know.
Beep, Richie.
I didn't hear that. I didn't. I beg your pardon.
In all seriousness, I had another theory about authors, and this doesn't apply to everyone, of course, but I noticed that there's a usually large number of authors who, for one reason or another, growing up felt like an outsider of some sort. Whether a lot of military brats are authors. And, for me, it was about moving around so much and always being on the outside of a community. How about yourself?
Yeah.
Tell me more about you.
Well, I'm definitely and I've said this before, a extrovert by training, but an introvert by nature. And, it's interesting you say that about, Army brats and people who have a lot of essentially time where they're separate. To become a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And I think if you are put in a place in your life where you have to escape, or you have to spend time alone, or you have to spend time in introspection, the novel becomes your best friend, right? And that's the thing that never lets you down. It's always there with you. You can bring it, you can literally put it in your pocket. And I was that kid for sure. I had a book with me every place that I went. And anytime that I felt even remotely uncomfortable with what was going on in the world, I would just immediately retreat between the pages of whatever book I brought with me. And there I was safe, no matter what else was going on. And I was I was also the kid that when my parents would say, "Come with me and go do this," I would say yes. And then immediately on whatever that thing would be, my dad would take me to a meeting or to some, on some grand adventure where we would meet lots of people. The introvert side of me would kick in. And then I would be like, okay, well, I can't handle this right now. I'm just going to go over to the corner and read the book. And so those two sides, my mother was quite an introvert and my father was quite an extrovert. And so those two sides of me were well served in the upbringing that I had. Yeah, it's interesting. And I, like you, I've done lots of different stuff. I owned a comic store. I owned a movie distribution company. I taught in a classroom for 10 years. Anything to do with words and pictures I liked, essentially. And I wasn't quite confident in my ability to get what was in my head onto the page until, sort of my late 20s, my early 30s. I just started to say, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. And a friend of mine, Anthony Allen, who was an industrial designer at the time, said, listen, you sell your strengths and you buy your weaknesses in every job. So whatever you don't know how to do, find someone to help you with that part. And whatever you do know how to do, get someone to pay you for that part. And that really sort of changed my worldview when it started to work in comics, because I couldn't get comics work. I was certainly not good enough to do comics, but I could draw well enough to do set design. I could draw well enough to get storyboards together. And so I started working with a film company, developing their ideas and their concepts. And that really gave me a lot of confidence to say, like, well, listen, they're paying me for my drawings. I can definitely do comics. Comics is not harder than producing a movie or a film or a television show. It's just a different set of skills. So when I'm sitting across the studio from Justin, who is roughly the same age now as I was then, and I see a guy who, and we're just going to talk about you while you're there, Justin, who just, anything he doesn't know how to do, he just sets about practicing until he's good at it. And I realized that didn't occur to me that was actually true until I'd already done it. I probably had produced 1,000 pages of comics before I realized, it's just practice that counts. Right?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
We all have a different way of going through this journey, but there's so many similarities as well. We're just not thinking about that.
Well, and as someone who wanted to do science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, stuff that was like sort of weird or horror stuff, anyone that I knew or could find as a mentor wasn't interested. They were all part of the literati, if you will, in Canadian literature, and they were just not interested in a story that didn't have a lonely cabin and a sad mother figure. Like they just weren't interested in working on a story with me that wasn't related to that. So it took me a while to find people who were doing it, and one of those people was Stephen Erickson, who is lived in Winnipeg for a good time, writer. Yeah, Steve. He would go to the same coffee shop that I went to write, and I didn't know that that's who he was or what he was doing, but a mutual friend of ours introduced us and said, like, here, you're doing the job that he wishes he had. You guys should talk, right? And it was Stephen that really said to me, like, oh, yeah, don't worry about trends. Don't worry about what the marketplace says. Don't worry about what editors want. Don't worry about what anybody says about your writing. Make the best story you can make first.
That's terrific.
And then the rest, then you start taking it around, right?
Yeah.
And he said the best part about doing it that way is then you'll make 5 or 6 stories and you will look at them and say, I don't like those ones. I'm not taking those anywhere. But this one I'm proud of. This one I'm willing to fight for. This one I'm willing to take around. And that was really important in my trajectory as a writer, to be with someone who just said, like, forget the industry, make a good book first. And he had gone through this, he told me about trying to get published in Canada and the US, and he was being turned down constantly. And it wasn't until he started submitting his work in the UK that he first got, that big publishing deal with the Mazzeline books. So when I first started out in comics, same thing. I started looking specifically, just sort of like almost as a lark, for UK publishers of independent comics. And my first published comic story was in a UK anthology, just by that same, his advice was that, like, if you are from somewhere far away, they'll imagine any flaw in the story as being cultural.
I like that.
Right? Or anything they perceive that way. And we laughed at that over espressos one day. And that really, like, set for me is that, your book isn't necessarily up to you who it's for. and Justin and I figured that out. We when we made our first graphic novel, we made it sort of for us, and we had a distribution model going to shows where we didn't need to ask a publisher's advice. We didn't need to ask their permission, and we had skills enough to produce a book and take it out and sell thousands of copies of it to people. And then those people who were showing up told us who our market was, right? We just sort of paid attention to who was there. So we got, in a way, we got lucky. It was lightning certainly struck there for us, which is not the done thing. But we don't get that. My book's arrived. Yeah, you can see, dear listener.
You have it.
Anita can see it, and Justin can see it if he turns his video on. But Automatic Age arrived. So I have, for myself, and the longtime listeners to the podcast will know, Justin and I do between 25 and 30 away shows a year. And so I have 1,000 copies of Automatic Age waiting to go with me on the road. And of course, everything's canceled. The world is canceled. So it's an interesting thing to be sitting on those books right now. And then, you can see behind me, I have a library at home. I was sitting here just 2 days ago, and it suddenly occurred to me that I was reading a book that had been written about 120 years ago. And I was just reading this story, and it just occurred to me that I'm discovering this for the first time now, 100 years later. Whatever I think the rush is to get my book out is kind of stupid. The real problem right now is that bookstores are closing, that everyone who sells books is out of a job. Like, that's the real tragedy right now. Not that I don't get to have a book launch, right? Because the book is written. Yeah. It exists. It will filter into the world at its own pace, and that also is not up to me. And I had a moment where I finally had a big sigh and said, okay, there are bigger problems, and publishing is the byproduct of writing, so let's just get on to the next thing.
That's a terrific way. That's a terrific approach to this. This is a moment in time that we are in right now. It will not last forever. Tomorrow, today is history, and all of that. The situation that we're in, it can be financially tough. It can be worrying. We're all worried about so many things right now, and that's a whole other aspect that can affect your artistry, just worry and stress. But it will pass. Relax, take a breath. I can't control this moment. All I can do is write a true story. And when the time comes to assist in it, whatever way I can, then I will do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Live in the moment.
Live in the moment. Well, and I've been very lucky. I think all of us have been lucky that only the quarantine has affected us. Like, the illness has not affected anyone in my family. The bigger stakes have not landed for us. And so all we have to do is isolate, monitor the bank account more closely than you normally might otherwise, and try to get your regular life rolling in a smaller space than you're used to. I mean, that's, as far as problems go, not so much.
That's interesting. And, that's very much the artist's way of thinking. Do you think... maybe that's arrogant for me to say, but I think we are very used to taking a step back and saying, wait a moment, let's think about the deeper picture here. And, other people who aren't artists are also capable of doing that. But I just think that in a way that's our job to think about that.
Yeah, well, and even Justin, you sent those pages to me last night, and then he was tweeting about just this idea of escape, right? You just have to make a place to go. Sometimes that's really the artist's power, right? You can make a place to go and visit, and then come back a little bit stronger if it worked out the right way.
I signed off an email with somebody the other day, and it was just there was sort of a thread of an idea that I find really interesting, and that is, let's rename this world. Let's give it a different name and pretend it's a different world and see how we think about it.
So true. So true. Well, this has been Super Pulp Science. We have had Anita Daher with us, and you can find her new book, You Don't Have to Die in the End, at booksellers everywhere.
McNally Robinson is my favorite independent bookstore. They do a stellar job, and they've got an online ordering system, so that's terrific. Information can be found about both our books through Great Plains Publications, and I think that they they'll also ship out directly from there, as a lot of publishers are.
You can also get copies of all of Justin and my work at McNally Robinson also. So we are, we love that bookstore. This is Gregory Kamichuk telling you that you should join the fight and make comics.